Who's Dalit? So the Rebbe is going to explain now. We said that we have these two mitzvahs that are connected to going into Eretz Yisrael, but we have two mitzvahs. So what's the idea of two mitzvahs? The Rebbe is going to say we have Torah and mitzvahs, and these are the two mitzvahs. The mitzvahs of Hakhel is mainly the level of mitzvahs, and the mitzvah of Sefer Torah is the part of Torah. Let's look inside. Dalet. Yesh levayir hatam. So we can explain the reason. Sheyeshnam shtei mitzvahs, that there are two mitzvahs. Kidei sheyihia tomid me'en kabbalas haTorah b'Sinai. And these two mitzvahs, so that always there should be similar to the acceptance of Torah by Sinai. We want to continue that, extend that as a reminder from going into Eretz Yisrael and during the generation. So we have these two mitzvahs, the mitzvah of Hakhel and the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah. And the Rebbe says that the Matan Torah Bahar Sinai hoyu b'chlalu shnei dvorim. Generally speaking, by Matan Torah there were two aspects. Aleph, Kabbalas HaTorah bi'inyono limud, receiving the Torah in the aspect of Torah, which is study. We receive the Torah, we study the Torah. But number two base, Kabbalas mitzvos, that we accepted also the mitzvahs, the study of Torah and the mitzvahs. B'yesh lema. Rabbis, we can say, Sheshtei ha-mitzvahs hanal hem keneged shnei inyonim elu, that these two above mitzvahs of Hakhel and Ksiva Sefer Torah correspond to these two aspects. Mitzvahs Hakhel, the mitzvah to gather the people in Yono Kabbalas mitzvahs HaTorah. The main idea is to accept the mitzvahs of the Torah. Even though that he was teaching, as the Rebbe will explain, from the psukim the king was reading, yes, but the purpose and the goal of all this was accepting the mitzvahs. Or mitzvahs ksiva Sefer Torah. On the other hand, the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah, that's mainly because of limud Torah. This is actually clearly in the psukim, these two ideas that Hakhel is mainly for mitzvahs and Sefer Torah, writing Sefer Torah is mainly for learning. So they listen and they learn v'yaru, the emphasis, they will fear as Hashem Elokeichem, God your God, v'shomru lasis, is called divrei HaTorah, is emphasized. They will keep and they will do all these words of the Torah. That's the idea of Hakhel. U'bnei asher lo yodu yishmu v'lomdu liyira, and also their sons that didn't know, they will listen and they will learn, so that they will fear as Hashem Elokeichem kol hayomim. It's all about yira. It's all about keeping the mitzvahs. It's about the level of observance. Hainu she'ikir hadgoshe hi al yiras Hashem. The main emphasis is the fear of Hashem, hamavi l'de'asiyas mitzvahs, which brings the person to doing mitzvahs. That's the emphasis. The pasuk says the mitzvah of Hakhel. Mashein kein mitzvahs ksiva Sefer Torah, as opposed to the mitzvah of writing Sefer Torah. Toichnahu, what's the idea, the content? What is the meaning of writing? V'ata kisu gomer v'lando as bnei Yisrael sima b'fiyam. Teach it. It's the idea of learning Torah. Put it in their mouths. Tachlis haksiva yalimud. The purpose, the goal of the writing is to study it. So this is the difference between Hakhel, which is for mitzvahs, yiras Hashem, and Ksiva Sefer Torah, which is for the learning. And this is also mirrors in halacha, the difference between them. This distinction between these two mitzvahs we also find in halacha. To the extent, because of the difference, there is a difference in practice, in action between the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs ve'inyan Hakhel kosva Rambam, in the mitzvahs and the idea of Hakhel, the Rambam writes, mitzvahs esa lahakil kol Yisrael, it's a mitzvah to gather all Yidden, anoshim v'noshim b'tav, men, women, and little children, chulu, v'likris b'az name in HaTorah, parshis, and to read in their ears, to listen to them, they should listen to the portions shemizarzus oison b'mitzvahs, that encourage them to do mitzvahs, u'mechaskis yideyim b'dasa emes, and strengthen their hand in the true religion, to strengthen them in the dasa emes, in the true religion. In Yiddishkeit, that means that this whole standing, this great and holy standing of Hakhel, that's not so much to learn the Torah, limud parshis elu, that we're studying this parshis. Elo b'shvil hachizuk v'hazirus b'kima mitzvos, but rather because of the strengthening and the encouragement in observing mitzvahs. So that's the idea of Hakhel as the Rambam describes it. That this is, because this is all about observance of mitzvahs, that's the reason why the Rambam writes, as he follows about what happened to the people that didn't make it, that they too need to be encouraged. Even those that don't recognize, don't know, they also need to prepare their hearts and to listen. They need to listen with awe, with dread, and this trembling joy to accept it all. And even great sages, they already know the whole Torah. They still have to listen with great intention. And who can't listen it needs to still be part. The reason the Torah set up this Hakhel standing is to strengthen our religion, the true religion. Mipi Hagmura Shoma. And it's as if you're hearing it from Hashem. This is the standing, is to strengthen Yiddishkeit. So this is the point the Rebbe is saying, that the goal is not the study, but the reception of the mitzvahs. That's why we do Hakhel. So here we see that it's important in halacha that everybody, that it's for the kima mitzvahs of, even if you're a chacham gadol, even if you weren't there, it has a practical nafkamina that you need to make sure that the people get encouraged so that they can all do mitzvahs. That's by the mitzvah of Hakhel. The same thing is true by the mitzvah of ksiva Sefer Torah. That it's not, it's the main thing is the learning, and that's why today we're mekayim the mitzvah with all learning. It's not about just the mitzvah; it's about the learning. V'gam zeh shemitzvah ksiva Sefer Torah achliso halimut negei ledina. This also, that the mitzvah of writing Sefer Torah, the goal is learning negei ledina. This is important halacha. Meshakosuv harash, as the Rosh writes, the mitzvahs ksivas, which means if the mitzvah was the actual writing Sefer Torah, then you'd have to write a Sefer Torah to fulfill the mitzvah. But we know you fulfill the mitzvah by writing anything that you learn. That means the goal of the mitzvah is the learning. The Rosh writes, the mitzvahs ksivas Torah shall kol echad v'echad hoiso, that the writing of Sefer Torah, which is on everyone. So in the earlier generation, they would write a Sefer Torah, and that's what they would study. They use Sefer Torah to study. Avol says the Rosh, but nowadays, that you write a Sefer Torah, you put it into the shul, so that publicly they read it over there. It's a mitzvah sasehi al kol ishmi Yisrael, So it's a positive mitzvah for every Jewish person who has the ability, who can afford it. Likkutei chumshei Torah u'Mishnah Gemara. That's the mitzvah say to write the 5 books of the Torah, the Mishnah, Gemara, Pirusha, the commentaries, lahagos behem, to study in them, who one of him and his sons. Ki mitzvahs ksivas haTorah, quoting the Rambam, emphasized here. The mitzvah of writing the Torah, he lilmid, but to learn. We have to learn it, Kidiksiv, as the Pasuk says, V'lamdo, as Bnei Yisrael, Sima B'fiyah. Teach it to the Bnei Yisrael, put it in their mouth. So therefore, the whatever we learn, we're Mekayim the mitzvah Ksiv Sefer Torah. V'al-yidei ha-Gemara v'apirushim, through the Gemara and the commentaries, Yeda Pirusha mitzvahs v'adinim al-Buriyam. He will know the meaning of the mitzvahs and the halachas clearly. L'chein hein heim ha-svarim, so those are the svarim that the Ras writes the Rosh, that a person is a mitzvah to write them, is because to know what the mitzvahs are, to learn, to study. It's all about study. So there we see the 2 parts of Torah, which is the Ksiva Sefer Torah, and mitzvahs, which is the Hakhel. And the Rebbe says, now we can also understand the difference in the manifestation of these mitzvahs, where the mitzvah of Hakhel is for all Yidden together, because mitzvahs everybody has to do together. The mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah, each one is individually, because learning is an individual thing, so therefore everybody is supposed to learn according to their level. Hey, this will also give us an understanding in another distinction between these 2 mitzvahs. So mitzvahs Sefer Torah, he mitzvahs hayochid. The mitzvah writing Sefer Torah, it's an individual mitzvah. We'll show in Rambam, as the Rambam writes in language of the Rambam. Mitzvahs asay, I'll call ish v'ish mi Yisrael. It's a positive mitzvah for each and every Jewish person. Lichtei Sefer Torah la'atzmai, to write a Sefer Torah for himself. But v'ilu mitzvahs Hakhel, but on the other hand, the mitzvahs Hakhel, shayach l'tzibur kuloi, that belongs to the entire community. Zehu toichen ha-mitzvah Hakhel, so that's the idea of the mitzvah, is the people. So that's a community mitzvah, and this is an individual mitzvah. So why is that so? So now we can explain based upon this distinction between Torah and mitzvahs. We can explain this distinction based on fitting to what was explained earlier. The writing of the Sefer Torah, the goal is to learn Torah. Mitzvahs Hakhel, the mitzvah of Hakhel is Kabbalah Sol mitzvahs, is to accept the yoke of mitzvahs. So based on that, we see the chiluk. Learning Torah isn't equal by all Yidden. The noisef ala chiluk ba'ofen kiyum. The noisef ala chiluk ba'ofen kiyum mitzvah zu. Because in addition, there's a difference how you fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah. So it's not the same thing. There's some people, some are only fulfilling the obligation if they constantly learn it day and night, kipshote literally. And others can fulfill their obligation by 1 verse in the morning and 1 verse in the afternoon. That will be Yom V'Laylo, 1 day and night. So there's a difference between people learning. Everybody learns differently, has a different obligation. So that's when your obligation, how much you're obligated to learn. But also in understanding of the Torah, there's a difference. Also in grasping of Torah, they're different one from the other. Everybody understands according to their relative to what they can. Mitzvahs ksiva sefer Torah hashayachas the limud v'asogas haTorah. Therefore, the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah, which, as we explained, that has a connection, that is connected to learning and understanding the Torah. It's each individual by themselves. It says mitzvah because there's a different obligation. When to learn is a different obligation. How you understand it, it's different one from the other, and therefore it's an individual personal mitzvah for each one. Some mitzvahs as opposed to doing mitzvahs. We only have one Torah. There's one law for all of us. To fulfill the Torah and the mitzvahs in action, we do the same mitzvahs, everybody. That's to do the mitzvah, we all do the same, and also accepting the yoke of mitzvahs. That awe that brings you to mitzvahs, it's also v'yoru v'yishamru lasis, because as the pasuk says, they will fear and they will keep to it. That yira is also the same. The Kabbalah sil malchus shemayim he lemailo mischalkus, accepting the yoke of the heavenly kingdom is beyond separation. The yeshova l'chol nefesh, that's equal for everyone. Gam mitzvahs Hakhel. That's why also the mitzvah of Hakhel. Which idea of Hakhel is to encourage the Yidden to the fear of Hashem and keeping mitzvahs. It's a community obligation. That includes all Yidden equally, because we're all in the same mitzvahs, the same Yirah Shamayim, same Kabbalah. We find these two aspects of that is equal and individualized in Matan Torah. Sheklolus Maimed Har Sinai, the general standing at Mar Sinai Hoyu L'Kol Yisrael Ke'echad. That was for all you know, everybody. We were there together, inclusive. Bebas Achaz Dafke, all at once. And Loshen Yochid Anich Hashem Alikecho V'Amru Chazal. And our sages tell us the Ilu Hoyu Yisrael Chasedim Afilu Odom Echad. Even if Yidden were missing even one person, they would not merit Matan Torah. It's for all the community. It's a community thing. Everybody needs to be there. Everybody needs to be a part. And on the other hand, Omer Razal, She'echad Me'atayimim, She'aseres Adibres, Nemru Bloshin Yochid. So that's saying that we're all together. But then our sages tell, why was it said Anochi Hashem Elokecha in a singular way? Not Elekechem, Hashem Elekechem, Umishum Shenemru Lekol Yochid VeYochid Bifnei Atzmi, because these 10 sayings were said individually. So they all had to be together. But on the other hand, we also have the individual. So therefore we can say there's two ways of giving the Torah as a community and as it individually. They are fitting the two aspects we're giving. I'm not giving a Matan Torah. First, there was Nisinas HaTorah u'mitzvos liYisrael b'ofen hashov v'lokoil, giving Torah mitzvahs to the Yidden in a way that was equal by everybody. That's everybody together, but then mitzad zeh, harematan Torah u'koilu prote klal Yisrael kimtzius achas. That includes all of the details of Klal Yisrael as one entity altogether, because all the mitzvahs is for everybody equally. Then, but then as opposed to the other part, the study of Torah that was given Matan Torah, that is for each one according to their level. So that's the Anochi Hashem Elokecha individualized, and the standing was the general, the thing which were all together. Boom. And now we need that experience to take place on a frequent basis to remind us of these two areas. We have the Hakhel and we have the writing of the Sefer Torah. So what's the reason, the need for this? That from time to time, the whole Sheva Shonim, every 7 years, you got to relieve anew, iberlem. You got to sort of live through as Maimed Har Sinai b'Hakhel, that standing of Sinai in a way of Hakhel. And also Shekol Echad Chayev Likkutei Sefer Torah, that everybody has to write a Sefer Torah Sheyeh Ki Kiblem Har Sinai, that it should be as if he has received Har Sinai. Why do we need to relive this? Everybody over there, the souls were all there. Commercial cost of the pasuk says, "Eis asher yesh nepoi v'es asher enenepoi." Those who are physically there, and those who are not physically there, Hashem made the covenant with them because their souls were all there. V'gam nitztamin, and we also. Why do we need to remind ourselves? We were all there already, and we were also been commanded. You got to be very careful and guard your souls very much, lest you forget this that what you've seen with your eyes, unless they will turn away from your heart for your life, as long as you live. You should pass them along, tell them, teach them, and let them know to your sons and your grandsons the day that you stood before God, your God, about Har Sinai. So we already have all these commandments to remember, and we were there. Why do we need to remind ourselves all the time? Because the main novelty of the standing of Har Sinai Matan Torah was was not just in learning Torah and listening to the mitzvahs of Hashem. Especially when you talk about learning Torah, that was before too. So it wasn't just to learn and to that would be enough of that, but an experience to see. It has to do, that was a visual as they were standing in Har Sinai. The novelty was that at that point it was seen. The pasuk says, Roim es hakolos omer. Or the pasuk, you all saw the sounds. Or the other pasuk says, Atem re'isim gam, you saw. Or the other pasuk says, Her onu Hashem Elokeinu es kved. Hashem has shown us. It was all seeing. V'zeh hoyo. And what was that purpose of showing us all that? Ba'avur. So that. This way you come to the completion. That if fear will be on you so you won't sin, is when you see it, the experience of seeing is more than learning about it and hearing about it. It's to experience to see it. And that's what keeps the Yidden intact. And we need to establish that every so often in order to bring it down in actually seeing. As it's known, that hearing is not the same as seeing it. The shmiya comes like from a distance. It's from far. You don't actually get it. You hear about it. That's why you can only hear a spiritual, like a sound. With your ears, you can't hear physical. Only take a voice, sound. You can only grasp it in hearing, which means understanding and grasping the spirituality. So what you hear, the person can understand. The spiritual part of the person can get the spiritual part. That's shmiya. Riyah is close. It's close by, so it grabs hold of the physical thing. It actually sees the physical thing. And it also impacts the physicality of his body. To the extent that there's something which is seeing, the item is truth by the person. It becomes real, totally real, totally truth. So this was the purpose of Matan Torah, not to tell us, but to experience, to see. They saw the sounds. They can see what is usually heard. That's why it became truthful to each one of the Yidden. I'm God your God. Yes, Loimar. So it says, this is the reason. It's not enough to pass it along by tradition, or they should hear. This is the reason, so that the generation which comes after the generation of Matan Torah, and the following generation, Yiru as Hashem Elikechem v'Shamru, Lasis is called even Torah. They should fear God, your God, and to keep the words of the Torah. Einem aspekes is not sufficient. Zechiras ma'amid har Sinai, just to remember the standing of our Sinai. Shezocher dover shayi b'havar, you remember something that was in the past. She'oz ha'odem u'berichut ma'adover. In that case, the person is distant. He's remembering something in the past. There needs to be a very specific aspect. Mitzvahs Hakhel, a mitzvah gathering. Shekol Yisrael anoshim noshim b'taf. That all Yidden, men, women, and children, they call them Yachad, are gathered together, Kemoi b'mayim Har Sinai, just as at the time when they were standing by Har Sinai. The Yira Atzmei, person should see himself kilu aton nitztabebo, as if now he was commanded to mepi agvura shoima, and he's hearing it from Hashem. Sha'amelech shliachu lashmiya divrei Hakhel. The king becomes the agent to tell us the words of Hashem, so you're hearing it through the shliach, hearing it from Hashem. We need to experience. That's why we have Hakhel. Same thing is with writing the Sefer Torah. Specifically when you write it by yourself, that he impacts by himself in his action. Then it's as if you received it from Har Sinai. This is similar to the vision of Matan Torah, that also the physical body of the person was with fear, awe, trembling, sweat. The person writes it, he's physically involved in the writing. He experiences that that aspect of Matan Torah. This is the two mitzvos that give us the two experience that we had in Matan Torah. Zion. Although nowadays that we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, we don't have the literally the mitzvah Hakhel. How to move on? It's understood. Just like it is in all matters that are dependent on the Mikdash, which is the sacrifices. That spiritually are also. Now, even though we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, but everything that took place in Beis Hamikdash on a spiritual level, we have it today too. Chazal, as our sages of blessed memory tell us, prayer takes the place of korbanos, so we don't have the physical korbanos, but we have prayer in their place. Yeshna means that the mitzvahs Hakhel, so we have similar to that also the mitzvahs Hakhel. Through the addition and the strengthening in this awakening, each one does, by gathering together men, women, and children that have a connection to it. And he encouraged them to study Torah, observing mitzvahs. In general, to fear God, your God, to be in awe of Hashem, Yiras Hashem. This impacts those who are gathered. They are reminded, they are remembered, and then it becomes that way. The Yira kol hayomim, to fear all days, as if we were just now commanded from Hashem, with that force of the vision of Matan Torah. Ad, to the extent. So we should do this today and apply this to whoever we have the influence to bring it about as if that vision, to visualize as if the time that it took place in Har Sinai. And to the extent, this makes quick and hastens Kima Yud, the fulfillment of the promise, Our, our eyes will see when you return to see him with mercy. And Yerushalayim, the place, the house of your Mikdash, Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi, the Beis HaMelech HaMashiach, with the coming of King Mashiach, Sheyikra Beis HaTorah Zazayse. Sheyikra Beis HaTorah Zazayse. He'll read in this Torah, Begeula HaMitzvah Vashlema, in the true and complete redemption, and very speedily in our days. This is Sichos Shabbos Pasha, the Tzom Vayeilech, Tovshin Lamed Gimel.